I saw a man standing in the pulpit, and he was a complete stranger. Garth Ennis's Preacher has always had a special place in my heart. Over the past 10 years, I followed just about every rumor about an adaptation of the graphic novel series. But for the most part, I thought nothing would come of it. After all, it was a little too transgressive for a broad audience. Hell, it was extreme even for the comic books I did read. But what made me fall in love with the series was not how over the top it was, but how, no matter how crazy it got, the characters were so down to earth, flawed, and human, that I couldn't help but love them. When I heard that pot aficionado Seth Rogen was adapting Preacher, a part of me got excited, but a part of me was hesitant. After seeing the interview, even though I enjoyed the film for what it was, I couldn't help but think that he was completely wrong as a showrunner to handle this particular story. For the longest time, many said that Preacher, while one of the most cinematic of graphic novels, that is, ones made in the US, many felt the themes were a little too controversial to be put on the big or small screen. Preacher had enough transgressive themes to make even the most general of audiences blush. Think X-Files Home, with the mutated incest offspring. Then add in Nazi fetishism and anti-religious themes that might even offend some of the more liberal of audiences. Rumors came along in the mid-2000s of HBO adapting the story into either a show or miniseries. And then they revealed a picture of Arseface that was so gloriously accurate to the comics that many fans got really excited. But nothing came of it. And we waited, only for the hopes of Preacher ever being adapted to fade for over a decade. When I heard the news about AMC picking up Preacher, my faith was restored. Sure, they might have to neuter some of the more extreme and transgressive moments, but the essence of Jesse, Tulip, and Cassidy would still be there. Then I saw the casting, and my heart dropped. No one felt right. First of all, there seems to be a trend of casting agents at AMC not wanting to hire Americans to play Southern roles, and instead hiring British actors. I mean, The Walking Dead often has memes based on Andrew Lincoln's often cringeworthy attempt at a Southern accent. Aside from that, none of the characters even look like their comic counterparts, which I'm a bit more forgiving of, but as a fan of the original source material, it still breaks my heart. One of my favorite things was that the badass hero of the comic had a striking resemblance of Joel Osteen, the famous televangelist. And with a name like Jesse Custer, I was expecting somebody a little bit pastier and not of Latin descent. Tulip, on the other hand, I'm actually alright with the casting of this Irish-Ethiopian actress, primarily because of the three characters, she's the best actor in the bunch. However, being a comic book reader, I will always slightly be reminded of another lover of Jesse's, named Cindy, who was a woman of color, and her race was a significant factor in the series. Cassidy, on the other hand, was cringeworthy. I know I'm probably in the minority opinion on this, and it may just be that I'm not fond of the actor. I first saw Joseph Gilgun in an unconventional BBC superhero show called Misfits, where he replaced a show favorite. His performance was always way too forced and showy. From what I've seen, his performance is way overacted, and his straining of his vocal cords to pull off an Irish accent was like nails on a chalkboard. He also feels a bit too hyperactive, like he forgot to take his Ritalin or something. I always read Cassidy like a guy who was too cool for his own good, not a spaz. He also bizarrely resembles Alan Cummings when he's introduced. Another comic book favorite is Arseface. When I saw the production stills of Arseface, he just didn't look hideous enough. Also, I think it was a wrong choice to go completely literal with his face, with the arsehole of a mouth, and the small scarring on his head being the only trait he has. He's too adorable, as fucked up as that might sound. He almost looks like a puppy dog. There was a great shot that frames Arseface in close-up when he hugs Jesse, which should have illuminated how grotesque he is, scars, saliva, and all, but ends up having no particular impact. I prefer the look the HBO production team came up with, but I will continue to stress, and I apologize, I have a bias to the comics. The show starts off like a classic cheesy B-movie, with a collection of planets and the giant words outer space, which take up the entire screen, as if we didn't know where we were. Either be more specific, or be more creative. Following this, we see an orb of light, presumably Genesis, travel across the galaxy and enter the body of a priest. Except the body is not Jesse Custer, it is a man in Central Africa. The man immediately explodes. Like cheesy old sci-fi, this show had to carry on the tradition of killing the black guy first. Granted, his death was pretty epic, as he spontaneously combusted in an explosion of blood and guts. The congregation runs away in fear. I'm not sure if this is a prelude of what's to come, or just a nod to comic fans, since the scene where the spirit enters Jesse is rather unspectacular in comparison. Does this mean the spirit is going to leave him and re-enter him? We then transition to Jesse getting dressed to Willie Nelson's Time of the Preacher, which is the opening song of the comic. This montage was perfect, and I might also give a tip of the hat to the costume designer, because I love the inclusion of the metal collar pieces. Such a Texan thing. It made the comic nerd in me smile. He walks up to the church's sign, which reads, "Open your ass and holes to Jesus." This hit a sense of humor from the comics and the character Jesse perfectly. So I was dismayed when I saw Jesse starting to fix the sign to say the original intended message. This is where I felt the show diverged, showing Jesse as much more straight-laced than the potty-mouthed hero from the comics. Perhaps Jesse's character has been stiff to make a much more dramatic character arc down the line. After the shift in the sermon at the end of the episode, I realized that as a comic book fan, this show was going to be a slow burn. We close on the giant words, Texas. I would have preferred a smaller subtitle of Anvil, Texas, but this show doesn't want to be subtle about anything. Jesse stands in the pulpit among a sparse congregation, which seems to be the type of crowd that go to church out of habit rather than any sort of spiritual conviction. This is further emphasized during his sermon with a little girl playing on an iPad with the sound on and half the congregation staring into space. Or, being someone who grew up in the church, a typical Sunday in a dead-end church. Jesse realizes that he doesn't have all the pages of his sermon, so he quickly wraps it up, only to be cut off by the organist playing "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." We then cut to Jesse at a neighborhood cookout, complete with drunk people and firearms, because Texas. Jesse talks to a man who has mommy issues, who apparently has control over him, even though she's in a retirement home. I can't imagine the restraint it must take for a minister not to tell people like this to shut the fuck up. And in the comics, neither could Jesse. Sure, on AMC you can't say fuck, but there's no reason why he couldn't yell, "Where the hell is your chin?" and have a similar effect. As the show progresses, I would assume that profanity wouldn't be as offensive as what's to come, but that being said, it's not a major detractor. Jesse, throughout the episode, tries to drive home to this man that he just has to be honest with her and open his heart. A young boy saves him with an open bottle of Clue Rooster beer, a great allusion to John Wayne's Rooster Cogburn from True Grit. The boy asks Jesse to hurt his father, who is abusive to his mom, to which Jesse responds that violence only escalates things. In this conversation, the boy says that before he was a preacher, he used to do things. What exactly? Even fans of the comics are at a bit of a loss. The boy asks him to pray for him, and as he's walking away, Jesse mutters to himself, "If anyone were listening, I would." Even only being 10 minutes into the show, I couldn't help but think that something was off. This was driven home by the rather random scene of the high school football team's mascot name being changed from Chief Red Savage, due to its obviously offensive nature, to Pedro the Prairie Dog, which is a play on undocumented Mexican and Latin American migrants. The radio announcer says that we should give this politically correct mascot a big old West Texas hello. Narratively, this scene serves no purpose, but I guess we have to show the audience how primitive and backwoods people from Anvil are. But this is a bizarre attempt to modernize the story, and watching the scene, I have no idea why this is an issue they felt Jesse needed to respond to. It felt a bit like the feeble response to the article Vice put out asking why True Detective Season 2 wasn't incorporating modern social issues like Black Lives Matter and Gamergate. If the writers felt pressed to bring up modern issues in bumfuck nowhere, Texas, why on earth is it PC mascots of a high school football team? Did there happen to be a Friday Night Lights marathon on TV when they were brainstorming? This scene does have a great touch, though, that I really liked. When Jesse takes a swig of whiskey in his truck, and the Saint of Killer's silhouette is once again featured on the bottle. Very nice. This scene has another problem, though. Hugo Root is considerably less overtly racist than he was in the comics. He talks about his frustrations of the mascot being changed. Jesse suggests that worse things could happen, and Root mentions that the Japanese allow their men to marry their pillows, which, after reading news stories of people marrying bridges and virtual girlfriends, makes movies like Lars and the Real Girl look normal and tame. But, again, it just feels so odd for these two characters to be having a conversation about these sorts of things. It might have been more interesting if the event in question was simply a teen being beaten up for his ethnicity, or being gay, or something like that. Also, apparently Jesse and Eugene have known each other, which establishes a relationship previous to what was provided in the comics, when the Saint of Killers is about to kill Sheriff Root. It is important to note that even subtle changes like this can change the dynamic of the characters dramatically. Cut to 3,000 feet above, and once again, the audience really doesn't need the title card to figure this out. And it's not nearly as clever as the show must think it is to use the same gag over and over again. Cassidy is getting himself completely wasted on booze and drugs. The group he's with has taken him from the casino and are offering to fly him to a party with hookers in Tijuana, by his suggestion. Win-win, right? Well, when he pops into the bathroom after spraying disinfectant to freshen up whatever horror's undead shit smells like, he discovers a Bible that has been completely marked up, looking like something John Doe would have come up with in Seven. When he walks back into the main cabin, he notices the sun is rising and comments he thought TJ was south of Vegas. After putting the pieces together, he attacks a guy with a bong, and then proceeds to fight and kill everyone on board, who decided to fight him with medieval weapons. Because of course, that's how you kill a vampire, right? I thought the fight choreography and the editing was really good, but I'm sorry. I really was taken back by just about everything having to do with Cassidy's presence. Everything about his performance felt forced to me. By curling his nose and straining his voice to a squeak, well, it doesn't sound genuinely Irish to me. Even Ennis himself said in an interview that he'd be okay with making Cassidy British. And I would have preferred him as that, rather than a poor imitation of an Irishman. His whole look and introduction was so jarring and grating, and as a first impression, it completely turned me against the character. There was one part of the scene that I did like, when Cassidy attacked the co-pilot by throwing a wine bottle into his chest and tipping him over to have a sweet taste of blood, before taking a pair of red aviator sunglasses from his front pocket and jumping out of the plane with an umbrella. What, did he think he was Mary Poppins or something? No, we find out later he needed to provide shade for when he goes splat into the ground. We then have a nice transition of Jesse squeezing ketchup out of a bottle and onto a plate. In this scene, the annoying man complaining about his mother takes it a step further, and at one point saying that it's like she's making him wear a colostomy bag. Ew. I love it, but ew. Jesse once again tells him to open his heart to her, which he acknowledges and walks away. The organist sits across from Jesse and tells him that Walter is sick, so he reluctantly responds maybe he should check in on him. She patronizes him and tells him it's kind of his job. Then, to further emphasize how much work he needs to be doing, she makes a comment that one of the local megachurches has just installed a Starbucks in the lobby, suggesting that there should be a serious effort in building a larger congregation. However, this installation pales in comparison to real-life extravagances, like jets, stadiums, etc. Of course, Jesse is barely interested in any of this. The woman makes a desperate attempt to present her availability, but Jesse is not interested. Oh, and by the way, her name is Emily. I had to IMDb that one, since I don't recall her name being uttered once in the episode. Maybe I missed it? Please let me know. Transition. Back in Africa. You know, Africa isn't a country, right? But way to clump an entire continent into looking like a shithole. And yes, I understand there are a lot of countries in Africa that are economically desperate, but goddamn, way to emphasize that stereotype. Two men step out of a Jeep and head to the church. Once again, a weird transition if you aren't going to introduce these characters in the first episode. And then, after a minute in Africa, we transition back to Jesse at Walter's house, who is passed out on the couch with his shirt off. While inside, Jesse notices a revolver on the dresser. The door of the shower is cracked open, steamy from the shower as Tulip sings. Jesse storms out of the house, throwing Walter's shirt on him. "Thanks for the warning, Walt," he exhales. Tulip walks to the window, wearing nothing but a towel over her head, as she stares out of the window. While it introduces Tulip and Jesse's relationship vaguely, this could have been an opportune moment for a flashback. But once again, the narrative structure of this pilot is messy, vague, and leaves the audience grasping for context clues, instead of just providing a simple conversation at a diner. Seriously, why change something this simple? Kansas. I really don't like these giant titles for every location. I found it a bit grating in Captain America: Civil War, even though I loved the movie, and I really hope this is not a thing. Not that long ago. Seriously, show? A time frame would have been nice. What bugs me about each of these titles is they usually state the absolute obvious. In the scene, a gunshot is fired at a man in the passenger seat, and we see a man struggling to strangle Tulip, and they diverge into a cornfield. She tries shooting behind her, missing several times, and gets dragged into the back seat, and the man proceeds to knock the gun out of her hand. I must say that in this scene, the choreography is really great, and it shows a vulnerability on her behalf that we do not see for the rest of the episode. She tries to take him out with a switchblade. No luck. He tries to turn the knife on her, and she bites his ear off. Then she stops the car, kicks him in the nuts, and shoves a cob of corn down his throat, killing him. Apparently this whole thing was about a map. I don't recall a map being in the comics, so I'll be interested to know what it pertains to. Perhaps the Holy Grail? She's then confronted by two kids, who are either so jaded or psychopathic, and seeing the aftermath, they respond, "So awesome!" Yeah, these kids are great, and I'll admit, I'll withstand my suspension of disbelief for their reaction because I loved the interaction so much. Tulip insists that the man she killed was very bad and asks if their parents are around. The little girl with her arms folded says, "My mom's dead, my dad's at work, but I'm 10 and I'm in charge." God damn. This kid's already blown everyone in the show so far out of the water. Tulip smiles and says, "I bet you are." A GPS is shown, saying that the bad guys are incoming, because apparently this show runs on video game logic, completely going against the tone of the story. The little girl tells Tulip she's in big trouble. Tulip says with a maniacal smile, "Oh, I know." Tulip scans the yard for volatile materials, and in a sequence that is an obvious homage to Edgar Wright films, "Who likes arts and crafts?" she says. The little boy shoots his arm up. We cut to them gathered together building what looks like pipe bombs. The IRA would be proud. The little girl wonders why Tulip just doesn't go to the police, and the little boy wonders if she could use help from her boyfriend. The little girl then spouts out that a girl doesn't always need some stupid guy helping her. Tulip agrees, saying, "That's right. A woman needs to know how to be strong and stand on her own." She then says if you're lucky enough to fall in love, you have to fight like a lion to keep it alive. She then suggests that Jesse ran away from her, and she's tracking him down and gonna eat him alive. She looks to the side, longing, and then growls at the kids. Then she reveals that they were not making pipe bombs, but in fact a homemade makeshift bazooka. And my suspension of disbelief is shattered. Awesome, but in no way even remotely realistic. Any fans of the Anarchy Cookbook want to prove me wrong? Please email me at allwalksoffilm@gmail.com and let me know if this is in fact plausible. Tulip, continuing to turn this insane scenario into children's games, suggests that they play hide and seek, locking them inside a tornado shelter as she proceeds to take out a helicopter and one survivor. The kids look at each other and open the door, seeing a man dead inside a destroyed helicopter, who, in reality, most likely would have been blown to pieces. But that's nitpicking. The little boy is quite impressed. Tulip somehow is completely clean, which also felt unrealistic, but at this point, sure, whatever. The little girl asks her name, to which she responds, "Priscilla Jean Henrietta O'Hare, but my friends call me Tulip." She gets in the car, revs the engine up, and drives away. The little girl smiles in awe. Considering that this was, in my opinion, the best scene in the episode, I hope we see these kids again, but I won't hold my breath. We then cut to a flashback of Jesse Custer's father, John, on his knees asking him to promise him something before getting shot in the head. In the flashback, his father has a clerical collar, which shows the first major divergence from the comics. I found this bit particularly frustrating because this bit suggests that possibly my favorite story of Preacher, How I Learned to Love the Lord, would be altered. In the comics, his father was a Marine, not a man of the cloth, and Jesse originally was forced into religion by his insane, zealous grandmother, who was responsible for the deaths of his two parents. This bit seemed to suggest that Jesse inherited his father's church and practice, which is a lot less messed up than having your grandmother force you into a coffin and then throw you into the bottom of the lake in order to love God. I'm hoping that this plotline could still happen, but it doesn't look too likely at this moment. Jesse wakes up from his flashback, gets out of the truck, and walks inside a large brick building that looks like a factory or a school, but it's unclear. The camera pans up and crows are seen swarming. Transition to vultures circling around a crater made by the impact of Cassidy. He is just a torso, surrounded by his own blood and one arm. He tries to open the umbrella to shade himself from the sun, but it's no use. He whimpers as he can't reach the bloody container he had poured the pilot's blood in. Deus Ex Hamburger shows up and looks at him, and Cassidy is able to reach and grab the cow to restore him back to tip-top shape. Vampire logic. Don't think about it too hard. Cut back to the building, which we discover is Quincannon Meat and Power. No giant meat woman in sight, or mysterious moaning in the background. Jesse speaks to the mom of the boy, asking for the favor how Donnie is. The guy that beat her. She replies that Donnie is up in Pecos, reenacting the Battle of Fredericksburg. A battle which ended up with a brutal hand-to-hand fight, foreshadowing his fight to come. Jesse then asks if Donnie had hurt her. She hesitates at first, but then exhales, "He hurts me all the time." Jesse presses her to go on, and she says that he beats her, bites her, punches her, hits her with a jump rope, and even scalded her with a tea kettle the day before. Jesse asks her if she could tell the sheriff the same thing that she told him. "I don't want that," she says. She then says that he doesn't understand what's going on with him and her. She likes it, which suggests to Jesse that she's a bit more on the extreme side of the subculture. The more she explains it, the more Jesse tries to shake off the reality of the situation, which is another suggestion that he's a lot less jaded than the Jesse in the comics. On second viewing, her story really doesn't hold up. She looks way too perturbed at the cookout, and way too sincerely turned on here. Russia. Once again, let's be as general as we can and not specify where, because heaven forbid we specify where exactly in the giant country of Russia we are. In this scene, we're suggested that a Satanist priest had the same experience as the Christian priest in Africa. The general consensus for the reason why Genesis entered the body of two opposite types of holy men is because Genesis is the offspring of both an angel and a demon. We transition back to Anvil, and finally, there isn't a giant title screen screaming Texas at me. Jesse walks up to Tulip's car. "Don't worry, Father. I ain't gonna shoot you." He gets in the car, and Tulip thanks him, and then says, "Let me tell you about this job." Jesse then replies, "No, don't bother. I'm not doing jobs anymore." Wait. Jesse was once a hitman? Is that what the show is suggesting? Come on, Jesse. I already got the map, which beats me what it's to, but it seems to be significant. He then grabs a piece of ear from the seat and asks her if it is what he thinks it is. She says no. It's a piece of shawarma I had earlier, tossing it out of the window. She then asks him if he's going to be a preacher, and he hesitantly says yes. She tells him that she's heard through the grapevine that he sucked at his job. "Why would you ever come back here?" she asks. Jesse exhales. "You know, the culture and cuisine." Tulip then says, "More like trying to fill your daddy's shoes," which is another sign that the events that lead to Jesse joining the parish are much different than they are in the comics. Where exactly is his crazy, depraved, animal fucking family supposed to fit in? "You cut your hair." "I hate it," Tulip says. "I agree. I like the mullet. I hope we get to see a bad wig that resembles his original look somewhere in the show." The two reminisce about old times and come to terms with their separation. "We did what we did, and we went our separate ways, and that's it," Tulip says. He tells Tulip he's not doing the job. The two bicker, and Jesse asks, "Or what?" To which she responds, "Or something," which is vague enough to be frustrating, and makes me wish they could have squeezed in a smart-ass comment at some point. But alas, the script for this pilot, at least for me, left something to be desired. "I don't hate you, Tulip. I wouldn't know how," which Jesse says with the utmost sincerity. Since this moment is realistically lit, I can barely see Jesse's face, so the lighting has either camouflaged or robbed me of a good performance. One worry that I have is when the show hits high drama, I'm really skeptical on the range of Dominic Cooper as an actor. Tulip replies, "Don't make me teach you then." Jesse steps out of the car and walks away from Tulip and knocks on Sheriff Root's door. Root walks out onto the porch confused. Jesse says that Eugene wanted to see him, to which Root lets him in and proceeds to make a meal, which is a disgusting blend of raw eggs and meat, smothered in hot sauce and thrown in a blender. He hands him the disgusting meal and sends him upstairs to give Eugene his meal. Ominous music plays as he walks upstairs. The music is of course reminiscent of 80s slasher films, such as the original Halloween sequels and Friday the 13th. Jesse knocks on the door, and Eugene throws open the door as loud hip-hop music blares in his bedroom. He slaps a hand on his shoulder and is excited to see him. As I mentioned earlier, his look has been significantly toned down from the comics. Also, since the show doesn't take place in the 90s, but in the modern era, the original reason what left him with an arse, ugly face seems to have been changed from trying to go out like Kurt Cobain but failing miserably to what else? I'm guessing we'll find out sure enough, but it seems like he may not have given his shotgun a blowjob. He says that he's really sorry for not being at church, but his look might be a bit of a distraction, and that he's sorry for the events that made him what he is today. He said he used to pray to God, and God used to talk back, but now he hears nothing. Jesse tries to comfort him, and Eugene gives him a huge hug. He then makes a giant slurp, but unfortunately, they couldn't have made a string of drool in CGI just to play up the gross factor. But of course, you're trying to attract a wide audience, right? A reporter states on the TV in a bar that Tom Cruise has died. He spontaneously exploded at a service at the Church of Scientology. After Tom Cruise's sue-heavy reaction to South Park's Trapped in the Closet episode, Tom Cruise has proven that he doesn't take jokes about him and his religion lightly. Someone in the audio department had way too much fun. Keep it up. Jesse sits at the bar watching Half Drunk, and Cassidy walks in wearing an outfit he stole from the clothesline after he took out the cow. He also has his character's signature red glasses and sits down right next to Jesse. Jesse slowly turns his head to the vampire gulping down on a bottle of hard liquor. He burps and gulps down more. "Evening, Padre," he grunts. After the dullest idle chit-chat, he takes off for the loo. Wow, what a memorable first meeting of these soon-to-be best friends. In pops Donnie, dressed in a full Confederate outfit, as if domestic violence can't make you a big enough asshole. Obviously pissed, Donnie punches Jesse square in the jaw. His anger builds as he points out that Jesse talked to his wife without talking to him first. So now we've gone from being worried that he's abusive to realizing that he's just kinky with his partner and back to hating his two-dimensional villainy. Cassidy is on the phone talking to someone about how he doesn't know how people keep on discovering him. The man on the phone responds that he needs to lay low. When Cassidy asks him to wire money, the man hangs up. One can speculate who this is. My guess, it's a family member, because who else would deal with Cassidy's shit? It'll be interesting to find out who this person is and their relevance to Cassidy's backstory. "Oh, come on," he says, slamming the phone down. Donnie leans into Jesse, whispering that he knows the snitch who told him, following with, "Looks like I got another whooping to attend to." He pats him and walks away, because the best thing to do before beating your kid is to tell someone else you're planning to do it. Jesse tells him not to do it. Donnie turns around and asks him why not. "You'd hear a noise," Jesse replies, "a high-pitched bunny and a bear trap sound. You'll know it when it comes, because you'll be making it." Donnie takes his jacket off and suggests that everyone watch him beat the shit out of the preacher. Jesse slams a bottle on his face and starts punching him. Then he proceeds to fight the remaining Confederate army. Subtle, right? A smirk comes across his face in slow-mo at one point. One man tries to come up behind Jesse, but Cassidy kicks a chair his way, knocking the last soldier down on his back. Donnie grunts and struggles on his knees. Jesse grabs him by the collar. "You ready for that noise now?" he asks. Sheriff Root steps in and tells Jesse, "Enough!" "I'm almost done, Sheriff," Jesse says, breaking Donnie's arm, and it's sounding about as close to a bunny and a bear trap as you could get. Outside of Tulip's interaction with the little psychopaths in the making, I thought this was another genuinely funny moment. Cut to Jesse and Cassidy. "Jesus, what kind of a preacher are you?" he says, jutting his jaw out and squeezing his lips, trying to force out a leprechaun-style Irish accent. "The lousy kind," Jesse replies. Cassidy responds that so long as he isn't messing with little children, he's ahead of the game. "Drinking, fighting, I can't even afford to fix the damn air conditioning." Cassidy responds, Sounds like the first verse of the worst country song ever written. Jesse says that Tulip was right. He should have never come back to Texas. Cassidy agrees, finally figuring out where he is. He talks about breaking a promise to Tulip. He feels that not abiding by promises matter, saying that they are the currency of faith. Cassidy, referring to the constant pursuit of him as a vampire, says that the world would be better off if the faith types would call it a day. Without faith, we'd still be hitting each other with dinosaur bones, Jesse replies, which is hilarious because it somewhat confirms that Jesse believes that humans and dinosaurs coexisted at some point, drinking up the creationist Kool-Aid. Cassidy says that we have things a lot worse than dinosaur bones now, and suggests that hope sets men at each other's throats. And that he's hopeless, which makes him fantastic. Once again, I feel that this was a genuine moment that was robbed of its significance due to the low lighting and shoddy performances by both Dominic Cooper and Joseph Gilgun. A door buzzes, keys jangle, and Jesse is let off on bail. Jesse and Cassidy introduce themselves with a handshake. Jesse leaves, and Cassidy asks the prison guard for a curtain so that he doesn't burn up with the rising sun. Cut to Jesse and Emily in a van together. It is a safe assumption to presume that she bailed him out. She suggests that they have to do something to keep up with the megachurch. Jesse tells her that he's quitting the clergy. The look on her face is complete shock. Jesse sighs. I thought I could make it work. I am who I am, I guess. With a frog in her throat, she acknowledges his statement. I guess so. He steps out of the van, and the woman says that she's not going to talk him out of it, because he was never really present in the first place. So what difference would it make if he were gone? Jesse walks away, and the two kids are fighting over an iPad. She grabs it, smashes the screen, and tosses it back to them sobbing, share it, signifying her disappointment in Jesse not only as a preacher giving up on his call, but a possible love interest. Emily drives away, and Jesse lights up a cigarette, and without missing a beat, Ted calls him again talking about his mom. Jesse pauses for a moment, noticing the lights flickering at the church. He cautiously walks inside. He flips the lights on and off, to no avail, and enters the sanctuary cautiously. He sits in a pew and sighs. Eugene was right. It's quiet, signifying the silence of God. Jesse looks straight at the cross, and he says to God, I want an answer, right now, or that's it. Getting on his knees and begging for forgiveness. He waits, sighs, gets back in the pew, saying, yeah, I thought as much. Fuck you too. Kind of a lackluster version of Conan's prayer to Crom. The door of the sanctuary slowly creaks and then flies open. Jesse stands up to investigate. A mostly invisible orb enters, screaming and crying like a baby. It is Genesis. The spirit enters him and sends him flying. I had a couple problems with this scene. The first being that I liked how, in the comics, Genesis appeared and entered Jesse through a burst of light. I'm not sure if it was budgetary restrictions, but it was low lit and even less defined than the orbs in Donnie Darko. I think that this moment needed to be shown with a bit more significance. As a result, the inception of the preacher with the word as his weapon was cheapened. The special effects were about on par with a student film, which, I get it. You can only put the budget into so many things, but after watching all of the seasons of The Walking Dead so far, I know that AMC sometimes likes to skimp on the special effects budget. But for such a pivotal moment in the comic, I wonder why it was so underplayed in the show. We then get an extended flashback to John Custer talking to Jesse right before his death. He tells him that he has much bigger things coming in his life, and he has to be one of the good guys. He tells him that Custers don't cry. They fight. Either it was post-production dubbing or line delivering, but this performance was not very convincing. A revolver appears by his head, and Jesse wakes up. Sitting by the bed is the organ lady. Apparently, Cassidy came to the church and saw him lying there, and has been repairing the air conditioning ever since. She tells him that it is Sunday, and she thought about canceling, but since he was feeling better, that he should announce that he's leaving. So Jesse jumps up and gets dressed. This also suggests that the entire family dynamic will change, unless they are going to be redundant and have his father experience the exact same thing that he did. Ted walks up to Jesse walking to the church. Same story about his mom and all, and Jesse looks into his eyes and says, "Be brave. Tell her the truth. Open your heart." The man acknowledges him and walks away, repeating his instruction. Jesse reacts to the weird feeling he got saying those words, and squints at the man walking away, muttering the same thing over and over. Cut to the worst rock cover of Amazing Grace, or the typical Sunday special music in the boonies. Tulip walks into the church and sits down right in front of Cassidy. Man, why are all the bit roles all acted better than the main cast? Jesse sighs and hesitates as he stands at the pulpit. No sermon today. You're welcome for that. Which probably is the kindest thing he's done the entire episode, admitting that he's a shitty preacher. I'll try not to punch anyone either, he says, and we cut to Donnie and a cast sitting next to his wife. He mentions vaguely that Tulip asked why he's back, and he didn't have an answer for her. I've let you down. He continues on explaining how bad a preacher he's been and illustrates a handful of his shortcomings. And he holds on, I can't. And he closes on, you deserve better, and saying that he can't quit. And at this point, I thought the destruction of the church was going to come. But I can now safely assume that I might have to wait an entire season before it happens. Or if it does at all. His divinely inspired speech continued, and the more and more I watched him deliver his lines, the more and more I felt that Dominic Cooper was struggling so hard to maintain a West Texan accent that his performance yet again suffered because of it. During his speech, we cut to Arseface getting bullied, Tulip doing her nails on a Grail Industries map, suggesting the Holy Grail plotline in the comics, which I doubt will be as transgressive as what we comic readers are familiar with. We then see Cassidy sitting in the shade, placing his hand out to the sun and watching it catch a blaze. We then cut back to Jesse, adding the final kicker to his speech. And last but not least, speak forth the word of God. Cut to Ted, continuing to repeat those lines, flying from Texas to Florida. He walks into a retirement home that apparently seems like a special needs ward that, for whatever reason, has the door wide open and no receptionist. But I'll forgive this moment, because the payoff was pretty great. He sits down to talk to his mother, being brave, and cutting his heart out. Which isn't exactly opening, but giving her your heart and stabbing it is essentially the same thing, right? This suggests that unlike Kilgrave's commands in Netflix's Jessica Jones, there is a certain degree of interpretation to the Word of God power. I'm sure given Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg's repertoire, we will see increasingly hilarious ways that Jesse's word power is misinterpreted. Cut to Jesse turning into a fire and brimstone preacher. For all this I am responsible, he says. I am that preacher. This is why I've come home. To save you. Cut to a man drinking tea in a cup. He takes the tea bag and eats it. At this point I rolled my eyes. Okay, he's weird. But let's not introduce him in any way. A man with a 5 o'clock shadow, sunglasses, and a cowboy hat comes straight to the window. And I can't help but think that they pulled this actor from a gay porno hours earlier. He leans into the window of the truck saying, "It's here," to the weird T-man we also saw in Africa, which is really all I have to go on so far. He steps out of the truck and puts his sunglasses on, and the two stand at the entrance of the church property. The church sign now says, "Repent, for he is coming." Spelled the bodily fluid way. Roll credits. So, after watching the episode twice, one straight through, and the other breaking it down in segments and scenes just as you have heard, I feel a little bit better about my first gut reaction, which was like my first reaction to the Star Wars prequels, feeling like my childhood had been ruined. Although, of course, it wouldn't be my childhood. It was my early adulthood, when I moved further away from the church. Preacher the comic was sort of my savior from a religious upbringing. My mom is a preacher, and a good one. But I always thought that way too many hypocrites and horrible people represented the loudest voice in the religion. Not to mention the horrible child abuse that was exposed in the early 2000s in the Catholic Church. I love this idea of a man who was forced into faith, which happens a lot more than you might think. Check out Jesus Camp to see how indoctrinated these poor kids are. Overall, I think the casting decisions could have been better and more careful, but hopefully the actors can grow and improve in their roles. The script is weak and has none of the outrageous, humorous, piss and vinegar feel of the comics. A lot of people working on this show, in production design, costumes, and audio, really demonstrate a love for the source material and shine through. I really don't want to hate this show. Nor do I want it to be a love-hate relationship that I had with the other AMC comic-adapted show, The Walking Dead, which is not a huge stab at the show, but I personally think it jumps from amazing episodes to why am I watching this show? Yeah, I'm still pissed about the finale of Season 6. A big change in the show is the time period. A lot of the designs and character interactions in the show fit more in the 90s, when it was written. Also, the show doesn't seem to have gained its footing, which is fine for a pilot, but pilots are usually supposed to set up interest in the show. And, well, while I liked parts, it didn't quite grab me. Not in the way that The Walking Dead, Lost, Breaking Bad, or Battlestar Galactica's epic miniseries pilot did. It seems way too disjointed, rough around the edges, which seems totally Preacher, but I personally think they could have done better in showing a bond between the characters. This is surprisingly hard for a lot of shows, getting their footing and developing characters interesting enough to continue on. I'm hoping that this 10-episode arc of this season is able to improve, because if not, it will be in show purgatory, that weird state of limbo where the fan base is large enough to garner a sequel, but the possibility is up in the air. Think Firefly, or any show that's tried to succeed on Fox. I will admit, I was a bit surprised by the praise for the pilot episode as I fumbled through my phone on my early morning commute the next day. Everyone seemed to absolutely love it. I'm sure some of you listening might be surprised that I didn't love it like everyone else. Outside of the fight choreography, the show seems pretty cheap. There are not 100 zombie extras, nor is there a ton of special effects to be seen, outside of the bits with Genesis. The pacing of the show is a bit odd. None of the characters have been grounded enough, and the way that it was structured, splicing bits of separate scenes together, felt awkward and disjointed, and not really in the positive way like Tarantino's earliest work. While Evan Goldberg and Seth Rogen might seem like the perfect choices after the apocalyptic comedy This Is the End, I can't help but worry how great the first half of their controversial film, The Interview, was compared to the latter. While this show seems to have some gall to tackle some of the crazier shit in the comic, albeit toned down, I worry that it will be at the expense of genuine character moments. It was surprising to see interview after interview with the creators expressing specifically that they did not want the show to be like the comics. Ennis said that everything in the show was run past him, but he was pretty much hands-off. He also said, And I quote, "It was really the sense I was getting that he was talking about letting the story breathe, not going in at 200 miles an hour, like how the comic starts. In other words, not trying to put the comic on screen. Taking the story, leaving the comics behind, and doing a TV show." Rogan said, "We're changing the specifics of how the narrative is unfolding. A lot of the building blocks we are not changing. A lot of the characters we're keeping. But we want to make a show that, if you're a fan of the comics, you don't know what to expect." Breaking Bad's Sam Caitlin said that he was hired to write the script before he had even heard of Preacher, although he caught up after he took the job. The truth of the matter is, he really just accepted to work with Rogan and Goldberg. Perhaps a lot of disconnect is the effort to try to make the show original compared to the comics. But as a fan, that's so disappointing. Preacher has struggled for a long time to be adapted in some capacity, either on film or TV. As I mentioned before, at one point HBO tried picking it up, and it was supposedly going to be very faithful, adapting each trade into an hour-long episode, which with 66 trades and a couple offshoots would equal about 7 seasons. 7 seasons seems like a good run, but already the pacing of this episode, I wouldn't be surprised if they try to stretch the plot line to 9 or 10 seasons. One of the things I loved about the comics was how tight-knit everything was. 9 volumes and you're done. It's not the mammoth of Game of Thrones, and it's quite a breeze to read. Although, I must admit, I just restarted my reread of the series recently, and due to the fact that I've been desperately trying to get this review out before it's presumably irrelevant with the arrival of the second episode, thank Christ for Memorial Day weekend, I have not been able to get as far in the comics as I would have liked. Since this was ordered as a pilot and not part of the rest of the season, I'm interested to see how or if the show might change. For now, staring at this complete stranger that I thought I knew, I remain skeptical.